Imagine passing a law so controversial that you legally block voters from hitting the pause button.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Right. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today is Tuesday, May 5, 2026, and we are tracking some massive breaking news out of Washington state.
We really are.
The state Supreme Court just handed down a ruling that does exactly that. They officially blocked a voter referendum that tried to pause the state's brand new millionaires tax.
And they did it using a really specific legal maneuver.
Exactly. Lawmakers shielded this new 9.9% tax on high earners by attaching what is called a necessity clause.
Right, which is basically, well, think of it as a heavy-duty do not touch sign.
A do not touch sign for voters. It's a legal tag that declares the tax absolutely essential to keep the government running.
Yeah, and because of that specific tag, the court ruled the Secretary of State does not have to process the referendum petition.
The petition filed by opponent groups like Let's Go Washington, they just shut it down.
It's a stunning legal outcome, really.
Which brings us to our mission today. We want to help you, the listener, make sense of Washington state's wild tax roller coaster.
Because it really is a roller coaster right now.
It is. The state is adding heavy new taxes on the wealthy while frantically deleting other taxes they literally just passed last year.
It's giving people whiplash.
We're going to unpack exactly what goes up, what comes down, and how these rapid-fire changes affect everyone.
And we have some great sources to pull from today to do that.
Yes, we are pulling from legal briefings from Ballard Spahr and K&L Gates, news reports from Bloomberg and local Washington radio, and official tax code updates from the Washington Department of Revenue.
So let's start with the anchor of today's news, right? The millionaires tax itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. What exactly is it?
At its core, this imposes a 9.9% tax on individuals making over $1 million in Washington base income.
And when does that actually hit people?
It officially starts in 2028, and the first taxes actually come due in 2029.
Okay, so it's still a few years out.
Right, but the state targets about 30,000 taxpayers with this measure. They designed it to generate billions of dollars to support state institutions.
Just 30,000 people generating billions.
Yeah. The math is pretty staggering. And crucially, it applies to residents and even to non-residents who earn income from Washington sources.
Let's talk about the real drama here, though, because the tax itself is only half the story.
The other half is how they forced it through.
Exactly. They attached that necessity clause we mentioned by stamping the tax as, necessary for the support of the state government. Yeah. Lawmakers legally bypassed the standard referendum process.
Right, which means you can't just gather signatures to pause the law and force a public vote before it takes effect.
Why does the law even allow that?
Well, the Washington Constitution does give the public the right to challenge laws through a referendum, but it carves out an explicit exception for laws that support the state government.
Ah, okay. So they use that exact phrasing.
Exactly. The state Supreme Court ruled that since this tax clearly generates revenue for existing state institutions, it qualifies for the exception.
So they just bypass the voters.
State Senator Jamie Peterson, who actually sponsored the tax, argued in court that the original framers of the state constitution never intended for tax measures to face referendums in the first place.
Wait, I have to push back on the logic the state used here.
Oh, go for it.
How can a tax that doesn't even start collecting money until 2029 be legally defined as an immediate necessity today in 2026?
That is a very good question.
Right. Brian Haywood, the guy who runs the Let's Go Washington political group, brought this exact argument to the courts.
He did.
Yeah.
He pointed out that since no revenue comes in for years, there is no possible way to interpret this as a current necessity.
It just doesn't make logical sense.
Well, the court essentially ruled that generating future revenue for state institutions meets the constitutional definition of support.
Even if it's years away.
Right, regardless of the delay in collection. They took a very, very broad interpretation of the word support.
So what can voters even do? Are they totally locked out?
Not completely. The court clarified they can still launch a ballot initiative to kill the tax entirely.
But the math makes that path so much harder, right?
Oh, absolutely. The numbers show exactly why this matters.
Because a referendum only requires 160,000 signatures to pause a law.
Yeah.
But a ballot initiative requires over 300,000 signatures to recall it.
It's a huge hurdle.
Opponents basically have to double their efforts, spend twice the money, and gather twice as many signatures just to get the issue on the ballot.
They doubled the cost of democracy for this specific issue.
That is a great way to put it.
And that's exactly why the necessity clause is so powerful. It just completely changes the playing field.
But this ruling doesn't end the fight, does it?
No, not at all. Another lawsuit is already challenging the constitutionality of the tax itself, arguing it violates state rules against progressive income taxes.
Well, if you think a 9.9% tax is steep on its own, you really have to see what happens when it collides with a trap Washington set just a few years ago.
Oh, the capital gains collision.
Yes, because this new income tax doesn't exist in a vacuum. It crashes right into the Washington capital gains tax.
Right. So back in 2021, the state passed a tax on the sale of long-term capital assets like stocks and bonds.
Now, what are the rates on that?
Currently, Washington charges a 7% tax on the first $1 million of capital gains, and then a 9.9% tax on anything above that.
I remember that facing a massive legal battle, too.
It absolutely did.
Because Washington has a long-standing constitutional rule that taxes on property must be uniform, right? And past courts have defined income as property.
Yes. So a progressive income tax was historically considered unconstitutional in Washington.
But the state found a way around it.
They did. In 2023, the Washington Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that the capital gains tax is perfectly legal.
How do they justify that?
They managed this by labeling it an excise tax on the transfer of assets, rather than a property tax on income.
Yeah. Oh, so changing the label.
Pretty much. By focusing on the transaction rather than the income itself, they basically bypassed the state's strict rules against progressive income taxes.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for taxpayers.
It gets so complicated here.
It really does. In 2028, when the new millionaires tax kicks in, it overlaps directly with that capital gains tax.
It hits the exact same money.
Right. If you make over $1 million and you sell a bunch of stock, the state wants a piece of both. Do you pay the capital gains tax and then get taxed again on your overall income?
Well, the state anticipated that collision, so they offer a tax credit.
Okay, a credit. How does that work?
If you pay Washington capital gains taxes, you get a credit against your millionaire's tax liability.
That sounds on the surface.
On the surface, yeah. But the mathematical reality of how that credit works effectively wipes out the lower 7% rate benefit for anyone subject to the millionaire's tax.
Wait, let me make sure I understand this mechanism, because analogies really help.
Yeah, let's break it down.
It sounds like a cover charge at a club where they have a minimum spend.
Okay, I like this.
So let's say the minimum spend for a VIP table is $1,000.
Right.
If you buy a $200 bottle of champagne, they don't charge you $1,200. They just credit the $200 toward your minimum.
Yep.
And you still owe $800 at the end of the night. The club guarantees they get their $1,000 maximum cut regardless of how you break it down. Is that what the state is doing?
That is a perfect way to look at it. Let's run the actual numbers so you can see it in action.
Walk me through it.
Say your base income is over $1 million. So you automatically trigger the 9.9% millionaire's tax.
Right, the VIP table minimum spend.
Exactly. Now, let's say you also have $500,000 in capital gains. Under the capital gains rules, that $500,000 should only be taxed at 7% because it sits under the $1 million threshold.
Right, because it's in the lower tier.
But that $500,000 is also part of your overall income.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yep. The millionaire's tax hits your overall income at 9.9%. You get a credit for the 7% you already paid on the capital gains, but you still owe the remaining 2.9% to satisfy the millionaire's tax requirement.
Wow. So the end result.
If you make over $1 million, you pay 9.9% across the board on everything. The 7% tier entirely vanishes for high earners.
That is wild. If you're listening right now and thinking, wait, am I getting taxed twice? The state's answer is technically no because of the credit.
Right. Technically, no.
But functionally, they layered one tax over another to flatten the rate at the absolute maximum level.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see a distinct philosophy emerging here.
What do you mean?
The state aggressively pushed these two massive taxes through the capital gains tax and the millionaire's tax. They fought tooth and nail in the courts to defend them.
And they won.
They did. But this aggressive strategy of capturing wealth at the very top triggered an immediate economic and political backlash.
And people just don't like it.
No, they don't. And that backlash forced the state into a frantic, almost chaotic retreat on other fronts.
Chaotic retreat is putting it mildly. While Washington pushes forward with income and capital gains taxes, the 2026 legislative session saw massive rollbacks of taxes they literally just passed 1 year ago.
It's incredible how fast they reversed course.
Let's talk about what I call the great rollback.
The most glaring example of this whiplash is the estate tax.
Oh, this one is crazy.
It really is.
Yeah.
In 2025, Washington passed a bill that hiked the state's maximum estate tax rate up to an astonishing 35%.
35%.
Yeah, 35%. That made it the highest estate tax rate in the entire nation by a wide margin.
35% of an estate. If you spend your whole life building a successful family business, the state suddenly demands more than a third of it upon your death.
Which is a huge hit.
The capital flight risk there is just obvious. Why would anyone wealthy stay?
Well, the reality of that risk must have terrified lawmakers. Because less than a year later, during the 2026 session, they panicked.
They just folded.
They did. They passed a new bill to slash the estate tax back down. For individuals who die after July 4, 2026, the rates drop back to a pre-2025 range of 10 to 20%.
So a massive cut.
Huge. The maximum 20% rate now only kicks in for estates valued over $9 million.
So they completely walked back the 35% hike. They basically admitted it was a step too far.
They absolutely did.
But, when diving into the sources, I noticed they left a trap behind.
Yes. The exemption trap.
Tell me about that.
So they froze the exemption threshold. Currently, the first $3 million of an estate is completely exempt from the tax.
Right.
Usually, tax codes tie exemptions to inflation. As money loses value over time and asset prices go up, the exemption grows.
That way, middle-class families don't accidentally get swallowed by a tax meant for the ultra-wealthy.
It's exactly. But the 2026 legislation tied the inflation calculation to a defunct index, the former Seattle-Tacoma-Bremerton Index.
Wait, an index that doesn't exist anymore?
Yep, and because that specific index isn't updated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics anymore, the $3 million exemption is frozen forever. It no longer rises with inflation.
That is so sneaky. So the top tax rate drops to appease the ultra-wealthy. But over time, inflation acts as an invisible tax.
That's exactly how it works.
It slowly pushes more middle-class estates, people with a modest home and a retirement account, over that frozen $3 million line.
It's a backdoor way to expand the tax base without holding a press conference to announce a tax hike.
That is just wild. But the estate tax isn't the only thing they retreated on.
No, not at all.
We have to look at the luxury aircraft fiasco.
Oh, this one is a classic example of capital flight.
In 2025, the state slapped a 10% luxury tax on private and business aircraft valued over $500,000. It was supposed to take effect in April 2026.
And let me guess, the people who own private jets didn't just sit there and pay it.
They absolutely did not.
I'm shocked.
Right. House Bill 2711 killed the aircraft tax less than a year after it passed, before it barely started.
Why so fast?
Because industry groups warned the state exactly what would happen. Wealthy owners simply flew their planes out of Washington.
Just literally slew the taxable asset across the border.
Exactly. They relocated their aircraft to hangars in neighboring states like Idaho or Oregon.
Wow.
Aviation businesses in Washington started losing customers. Mechanics had fewer planes to work on, and the local aviation industry began shrinking rapidly. The state realized they were driving capital right over the border.
It's the ultimate example of squeezing a water balloon. You squeeze the balloon by passing a luxury aircraft tax, and the pressure just bulges out somewhere else.
The wealthy just moved the asset.
Right. But the state still needed to make up for the lost aircraft tax revenue they had already promised to the budget.
They already spent the money on paper.
Exactly. So they turned around and hit the little guy.
Of course they did.
How? To replace the money they thought they would get from the luxury aircraft tax, they hiked the aviation fuel tax from 18 cents to 25 cents per gallon.
Ouch.
And they also doubled annual aircraft registration fees from $15 to $30 and baked in an automatic 2% annual increase starting in 2028.
Think about the irony there.
It's pretty stark.
The ultra-wealthy fly their multi-million-dollar private jets out of state to dodge the 10% tax. Meanwhile, the everyday pilot flying a small 40-year-old Cessna ends up paying higher fuel taxes and double the registration fees to cover the gap left behind by the billionaires.
It perfectly illustrates the consequence of capital flight. Mobile assets will always flee high taxes.
Every single time.
But the state didn't roll back all their luxury taxes.
They kept some of them.
Yeah, the 8% tax on luxury cars and the 0.5% tax on recreational watercraft remain in effect. However, They quietly tweak the rules to extract more money from buyers without changing the headline rate.
Oh, I dug into this specific tweak in the Department of Revenue updates.
It's pretty hidden, right?
It's very hidden. They changed the use tax base to align with the sales tax base.
Which sounds incredibly boring.
It sounds so boring until you realize what it actually means. Basically, the state quietly removed the ability to deduct trade-in values. So if I buy a $100,000 luxury car and trade in my old $40,000 vehicle, I used to only pay the 8% tax on the $60,000 difference.
Because you subtracted the trade-in.
Right. Now you're telling me I pay the 8% tax on the full $100,000 purchase price, regardless of my trade-in.
You've got it. It's a massive functional tax increase for anyone buying a vehicle in that category, completely hidden inside administrative language about aligning tax bases.
It's fascinating how many ways a state can increase your taxes without ever voting on a tax rate increase.
They get very creative.
But we shouldn't just focus on the ultra-wealthy or luxury goods. The state also had to walk back taxes that hit everyday businesses.
Right, let's look at the service industry.
What happened there?
Well, in May 2025, the state drastically expanded the retail sales tax. For the first time ever, they slapped sales taxes on a huge range of business-to-business services.
Like what kind of services?
IT support, security services, custom software development, and even temporary staffing.
If you run a small business, that is devastating.
It really hurts their bottom line.
Imagine you own a local hardware store. You suddenly have to pay state sales tax just to hire a temporary worker for the busy season.
Right.
Or you pay extra tax when you hire a local IT guy to fix your server. Your operating costs skyrocket overnight through no fault of your own.
And the blowback from the business community was severe. It was bad enough that the 2026 legislature actually passed a bill to repeal most of these service taxes.
So they listened to the businesses.
Sort of. By January 1st, 2029, the sales tax on IT, temporary staffing, and security services will completely vanish. Interestingly, they decided to keep the tax on advertising services.
Wait, if this tax is actively hurting small businesses today, why are they waiting until 2029 to repeal it?
Budgeting realities.
Oh, they spent the money again.
Yep. They already accounted for that revenue in their short-term financial projections. They need the money now to balance the books, so businesses have to suffer through the tax for a few more years.
That is just brutal.
However, they did provide immediate relief to a few specific groups.
Who gets the relief?
Starting July 2026, K-12 public schools and nonprofits get an immediate exemption from these service taxes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, if a public school needs to hire temporary staffing or event security, they no longer have to pay the state sales tax on those services.
Which makes sense, because taxing public schools just shifts state money from one pocket to another anyway.
Exactly.
But it's not all tax cuts and relief for the tech sector. The state completely killed a long-standing sales tax exemption for data centers.
Yeah, this one was a big shift.
Yeah.
Since 2010, data center operators in most Washington counties enjoyed an exemption from sales tax on both new and replacement server equipment.
That's a big incentive to build data centers there.
Huge incentive. But the 2026 legislature passed a bill which eliminates the exemption for replacement and refurbished equipment starting July 1st, 2026.
So they still exempt new equipment.
They kept the exemption of new equipment at new data centers, yeah. But if you are maintaining an existing facility and need to swap out thousands of aging servers, you're now paying full sales tax.
So what does this all mean? Zooming out, let's look at the totality of what we just uncovered.
It's a lot to take in.
We see the state ramming through a 9.9% millionaires tax and a massive capital gains tax, while hiding behind necessity clauses to block voters from stopping them.
Right.
But at the exact same time, they are sprinting to repeal 35% estate taxes, killing luxury airplane taxes, and rolling back IT service taxes they passed just 12 months ago.
It's totally contradictory.
It looks like total whiplash. Is this just state lawmakers throwing darts at a board, or does this reveal a deeper panic about wealth leaving the state?
This raises an important question, and I think it reveals a profound lesson about the limits of state-level taxation in a modern economy.
What are they realizing?
What you are seeing is a state desperately to balance an expanding budget without triggering a mass exodus of its tax base.
They're testing the fences.
Exactly. They push the tax rate up to test the waters, but the moment capital starts to flee, like we saw clearly with the airplanes, and the moment they see real economic damage to local industries, they rapidly backpedal.
Because the wealth isn't trapped.
They're discovering that wealth today is highly mobile. If you tax a stationary asset like a piece of real estate, You collect the money because it can't move.
The house isn't going anywhere.
Right. But if you tax a mobile asset, like a private jet or a billionaire's residency, it just moves.
It's a giant game of financial whack-a-mole.
It really is.
You smash the estate tax, and the wealth just moves out of state before the owner dies. You smash the airplane tax, the planes literally fly away.
Yep.
So you pivot to a millionaire's tax on income, and you lock out the voters using the courts to make absolutely sure the tax sticks.
And that volatility is what makes studying Washington state right now so fascinating.
It's a live experiment.
The state is essentially experimenting with its tax code in real time. They are constantly hunting for the maximum extraction point.
Yeah.
The highest possible tax rate they can charge before the golden goose flies away.
Well, let's wrap up everything we unpacked today.
Let's do it.
We explored how Washington state successfully shielded a massive new 9.9% millionaires tax from a direct voter referendum by using a constitutional necessity clause,
Bypassing the voters completely.
We broke down the math of how that new income tax swallows the existing capital gains brackets, functioning like a club's minimum cover charge to force high earners into a flat 9.9% rate.
And we covered how the state simultaneously scrambled to repeal extreme 35% estate taxes and 10% luxury aircraft taxes to stop wealth from fleeing across state lines.
All while leaving middle-class inflation traps and higher fuel taxes in their wake.
And if you're listening to this, understanding this roller coaster is crucial, regardless of your income bracket.
Because it affects everyone.
It does. Whether you are a small business owner trying to plan a budget, an investor managing assets, or just an everyday voter, living in a state where the tax code changes direction every 12 months makes financial planning incredibly difficult.
You can't plan for the future.
No, you can't. Predictability is the bedrock of a stable economy, and right now, predictability is in very short supply.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over. As remote work becomes permanent, and the ultra-wealthy can operate their businesses from laptops on a beach anywhere in the world, residency is becoming a highly fluid concept.
It really is. People can just leave.
If states continue to treat tax policy like a volatile weapon, passing and repealing laws year by year, will state lines eventually stop mattering altogether?
That is a great question.
Will governments eventually have to invent entirely new global ways to track and tax where value is actually created, rather than where a person happens to sleep?
They might have to.
Imagine trying to put a do not touch sign on a taxpayer who can simply close their laptop and disappear. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.